So welcome back to So Your Parents Are Old, everybody. I am Vanessa Grigoriadis, and I am here this week with Cody Delistraty, who wrote an amazing book called The Grief Cure, which is about the loss of his mother and what I believe is called profound grief. At least I've heard that applied to myself. Since it's 8 years since my dad passed, and I sort of feel like it was yesterday. But I bet he's going to tell us that it's a little different because he spent a lot of time investigating grief, why it lasts, how you get over it, the roller coaster of it, the different ways that you can alleviate some of that pain. It's sort of, the book is almost like a quest narrative. It's a quest down to Hades in some ways, and how you can bring those, those lessons up to earth and use them for yourself. I'm using these references because despite his name, he is a Greek man. He's a Greek American man, as am I. Woman, though. So Yasu.
Back at you.
Yeah. That would be about all the Greek that I know. So, Kalispera. That means good afternoon for those of you who don't know. But Cody, tell me, you lost your mother when she was quite young. Was she was in her 60s?
50s.
50s. Okay. So tell us what happened and how old you were at that time.
Yeah, so I was graduating college when she died, but she was diagnosed with metastatic melanoma, and she lived for 4 years after that diagnosis almost. And then, died when I was in my very early 20s graduating college.
Yeah. I mean, my father died of bone cancer, and he, fun fact, if you go to Sloan Kettering, the floor for the bone cancer folks is the same floor for the melanoma folks.
Oh, there you go.
So we were all there together. It's
very macabre connection.
Very macabre, because those are two very bad cancers to have, right? They are not ones where once you're terminal, you're not, unlike the title of your book, the grief court, generally people don't live with them that long. I mean, 4 years is quite a long time.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So for you, how did you experience her diagnosis?
I was very young, and I was studying far away, and I would come home now and again, and especially came home with increasing frequency as it became clear that she was, more than likely going to die. I think the experience during the her going to all these experimental trials, she was doing trials in the Washington, D.C. area. She was doing trials in Seattle, near to where I grew up. And the experience then was a time of like blueprints. Like we had a sense of, this is what we can do. These are the tests we can go for. These are the new doctors that we can see. These are the experimental trials we can try to get enrolled in. And it felt like it felt like we had plans. And I think that the most shocking part, besides her death and all of the emotions that came from that, but after she died, there was no blueprint. And I think that was a really hard thing for me in my grief, as far as kind of what to do next. And I mean, as you well know, the typical American Western conception is the 5 stages of grief, which is wrong, which I can explain. There's closure, which is also wrong. And I mean, for the 5 stages, this comes, of course, from the Swiss American psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who it didn't have to do with grief. It had to do with people coming to terms with their own death, terminal patients, and realizing that. And even in her later career, she said that those 5 stages weren't really something that she saw as being accurately applied.
So wait, so how did they become the standard of care here?
They've become standard of care. Feels like we're overshooting it a bit, but yeah, I mean, I think I would be comfortable saying it's saturated media culture.
Sure.
I mean, you have I talk about in the book, there's an episode of Friends where, Rachel is trying to get over Ross and they're talking about closure and going through the 5 stages of grief in that way. And there's this whole sense of, I think people are really attracted, especially I think Americans, to the sort of bootstrap, do it yourself, rigid structure where you can really get through something. You can do it on your own. You don't necessarily need a community within a lot of people's idea of the 5 stages, but it leads to these really, unhelpful coping strategies. I was talking to a psychologist who said she had a patient who came in who was struggling with her grief. And she said, yeah, I've been trying to get my husband to really get me angry so I could get through the anger stage faster. It's like, it's not how this is going to work.
So it's what? It's denial, anger, coping. It's one
denial,
where,
anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And kind of the idea too of acceptance is, in my view, very similar to people's idea of closure, which is that you're done, it's in the rearview mirror, you're good to go. And anyone who has experienced a loss knows that that's very far from the case, that these things are with you all the time. And I think it's really harmful to try to tamp it down and say that it's gone forever. I find so much more value in thinking about my mom when I need to, and kind of keeping her in her memory with me, rather than thinking of it as something that was on a road long ago that I'll never drive again.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's very American in some ways, right? And now we're ready to do business again.
Well, I mean, this is, but 100%, because I think the average time off for American office workers is like 5 days for the death of a parent. It's even less for grandparents or people who are further away. But yeah, exactly. It's take your time, but don't take your time. Get back to normal, which means get back to the office, get back to work. And there's this sense of like productivity culture and all these things that kind of infiltrate our thinking around grief.
So what is profound grief or unresolved grief, or is this just normal grief that people are slapping a label on?
Yeah. So something I write about in the book early on is this relatively new diagnosis it's called prolonged grief disorder, PGD. And it was added to the most recent DSM, the DSM-5-TR, the text revision in 2022, I believe. And a similar version had been added to the WHO's, the World Health Organization's ICD, which is the kind of global version of the DSM. That's the International Classification of Diseases and Related Health Problems. And that was in 2019. But basically, this group of health professionals had been working for really a long time, like well over a decade, to try to get the American Psychiatric Association to include prolonged grief disorder, because they ultimately claim that it allows for clinicians to differentiate between like normal grief and what is considered persistent, enduring, disabling grief. And there's all sorts of research on it. The numbers sort of change depending on who you talk to, but a typical one that I go with is about 10% of grieving people will have this kind of prolonged grief. There's all sorts of metrics that you have to meet in order to get there. You have to have a variety of symptoms that include things like identity disruption, marked sense of disbelief, avoidance, intense emotional pain or numbness. And it has to last for at least a year. And it has to not be something that's considered standard within your culture. So it was highly controversial. The DSM obviously has its own long history of controversy. It didn't take out homosexuality as being a mental illness fully until I think like the early 2010s. So there's obviously a whole sense of issue around that, but it is undeniably important in what care gets insurance approval, which is obviously going to be very important in what care gets done. And the claim is that people have really long suffered from a pathological form of grief, that, you'd have, the claim is that you'd have widows in the early 20th century dressing in black for years. And that was a form of pathological grieving, or that I even talked to one of the proponents of it who said C.S. Lewis, in writing A Grief Observed, had prolonged grief disorder, given how he characterized his grieving process around the death of his wife. I find it a challenge to be fully on board with it, just because I think, kind of going to what we were talking about before of the Americanness of grieving, that it really pigeonholes grief into a hyper medical context. But I think by the same token, that is where we solve our problems, and that is where money goes. And so I understand from that perspective the value of adding it. And some people will tell you it's really helpful to have a name for it. It makes them feel freer. It makes them feel less weird. But then other people will say you're pathologizing what is entirely normal, which is to be grieving. And like we said before, you grieve your whole life. Does that mean you have a medical diagnosis that you need to be attending to? Not necessarily. My Hellenic knowledge is sufficiently minimal that I don't know if I can speak to that, but what I can speak to is the women wearing black. That was an early 20th century American and British phenomenon too, that got changed or really was phased out for some pretty kind of fascinating reasons that I think speaks to
why
what is a larger, there's been a larger trend in, I think the most valuable kind of grief is communal grieving with other people, finding a way to be just incredibly as open as you're comfortable about with it, both in being the one who is grieving and wants to talk about it, and also being someone who's receptive to someone who wants to talk about it. And I wrote a New Yorker essay for this kind of a while ago, but basically the premise is that in really the 18th century, this medievalist called Philippe Ariès, who's working in the 20th century, but was a medievalist. And he was writing about how when people died, it was a very standard thing. It was expected. You'd have your family around you. They're usually dying relatively young because there's less medical care. And there's a sense that it's something that happens. It's something that you do. And it happened in the home much more frequently than it would happen in the hospital. And I think a big pivot point in individual to collective grieving, or from collective grieving to individual grieving, really happened under President Woodrow Wilson trying to get into the First World War. So he ran on an isolationist platform, and suffragettes at the time, working to get the 19th Amendment passed, were marching in the streets in all black against the war, saying that our husbands, our brothers, our sons are going to die needlessly in a war that we don't want to be a part of. And we're making a big deal about it. And it was really affecting how Americans viewed the potential war effort. And there's some fascinating letters between this woman called Anna Howard Shaw, who's a physician and also a leading suffragette, and President Wilson, where he was basically saying, if you guys, can you just tone down the outerwear and the showing of your grief so publicly? And in return, he was going to support the passing of women's right to vote, the 19th Amendment.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know this at all. Yeah.
Yeah, and they did. And you see also with the keep calm and carry on ethos in the UK, this idea of really that it's actually more patriotic, it was often turned into, or just more noble to repress your grief and to bring it as something internal to yourself and not something that would really, bother your neighbors. And we really saw that through the 20th century. And you get into, we can talk about things like happiness culture and treat yourself culture and things like that, where it becomes increasingly important to project a sense of happiness, even in times of great internal turmoil. And now, the great goal, I think, would be to return to a communal way of grieving, but we are in a space where kind of the best we typically do that is online, which kind of works and kind of doesn't work. There was a wild, I don't know if you saw this, I think it was in like 2013, but people were doing funeral selfies, which is as kind of awkward as it sounds.
Yeah.
But there's a sense of trying to integrate death into a communal life. It's people, I think, really desperately trying to share the emotional difficulties of a lost loved one with other people, and we clearly haven't kind of figured it out yet. We haven't cracked the code of how to be more communal, but there's some amazing organizations like the Dinner Party you might have heard of.
What's that for?
It's people who've gone through, it's usually delineated by specific kinds of loss. So like lost a mom or lost a son or got divorced in a particularly difficult way. And it's people who've all had that same experience, and they physically get together and have dinner together and just can chat about it and feel open to chat about it. Cause that's such a big aspect, right? Is this sense of, I don't want to burden someone. And then someone thinks, well, I don't want to bring up their loss because it might create an awkwardness. And so you get this kind of vicious circle where people, I think, intrinsically want to help each other, but they ultimately end up sort of not talking, both trying to protect the other.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. I mean, I have thought about how there should be some sort of like spa weekend where you go somewhere, you can do this for loss, or you can do it also for taking care of your old parents. And like, we're going to talk about all the different stages that you're going to have to deal with and like get you all up to speed. There's no like scaffolding for this phase of life. And it feels like retreat centers would be like a great place to start it off, because it's hard to just integrate it into your daily life when there's a million other things going on. But before we move on, tell me what Keep Calm and Carry On is, because now you're making me think that is a war slogan from the British.
It was.
In World War I or II? I am trying to remember.
Preparation for World War II, a motivational poster. Yeah, and I really just view it as aligned with the sort of general repression of public grieving as a means to instill patriotism and instill basically desire or acceptance for otherwise not super popular war efforts.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you think about, Jews have like the Shiva, right? It's 7 days, and it's supposed to then, I don't know, then what? Then that part is over. The community part is over.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, and I think you have versions of that all across the sort of Protestant or secular version is setting up a email sign up for who's bringing food sort of thing to the person who's grieving. But yeah, I mean, it does end. I think what is most valuable is just being just aware of when people want to talk about it. I find myself discussing grief a lot. I find myself I'm on a plane, I'm at a bar. Obviously, if the book comes up in some way, but more often than not, it's just, I've found one of the biggest shocks in reporting this book was how much people do want to talk about their loss and their grief, and how so often they either, for one reason or another, they feel shut down in that. And so being open to that as a huge value.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think? Like, let's do a little world tour and talk about some different cultures. I've been to India. I've seen the bodies get burned and then put in the river, I don't know. I mean, that's certainly very communal. That's certainly a public cremation.
Yeah,
right?
there's a Hawaiian tradition where you take the eldest, usually son, tries to take up the last breath of the dying person as a mean to sort of continue that. So then they have that breath in them and are able to continue that person's legacy. But all that, yeah, and that the Indian traditions you're speak to, I mean, also Day of the Dead is a huge one in Mexico, where people are really, they're out celebrating death, and they're doing it together, and they're doing it as a party. And I think that is makes so much more sense to me than going home from the hospital and like maybe getting a few emails from friends and then otherwise kind of shutting it down. Just as far as the lineage and the legacy that's able to be maintained, whether it's through the breath or it's through coming together in some kind of annual tradition.
Yeah. I mean, I remember somebody said to me, everybody cares a lot for a week. You know, I mean, people are suddenly like, they're all about your family, and they want to know, and they want to reminisce, and they want to come to the, whatever it is, memorial service or whatever. And then, you know, what happens after that, then you're sort of left with your inner group of people, and usually a couple other people who still want to stick around. I mean, you will appreciate this. So my dad, we did not know what his plans were because he died very suddenly. We didn't know what he wanted to do with his body.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
Yeah. And he grew up in the Greek church. He hated the church. He had dropped off going there. And he always said, like, just cremate me and throw me off the side of like a boat. That's what I want. But it was always said as almost like a joke, you know? So then you're left in the situation where in the Greek church, you cannot be cremated. So it was like, okay, well, are we going to have a funeral in a church, or are we going to do what he would toss off? But he said it multiple times. So it wasn't as though this was just like an errant thought. So like, what are we going to do? And one of the ladies from the church was like, psst, let me tell you how you do this. This is obviously not the first time this has come up. You go to the specific funeral home, like, you know, uptown, and you tell them you're repatriating the body to Greece, because in Athens and the surroundings, there are so many people, dead people, buried in the ground. They're like 6 caskets deep in there. And so the church has said, like, by the authority vested in me by the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost, in Athens, people can be cremated. It's like, okay.
Ingenious.
So we like went to this place. We said, we're going, you know, and it's just like, okay. And then they were like, okay, well, you know, which of these coffins do you want to cremate them in? Like, how much are you going to pay for the cremation coffin? You know, so it was like,
so cremating him in a coffin? So you were going to put it in the coffin and then toss it over a boat?
So he had to be in a coffin for the church, right? Because
and then he
it's
gets
an
cremated,
open casket, right? So it's an open casket cremation. I mean, it's open casket in the church, and then this is what we did, and. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if that was the right choice, not the right choice. It was really, there was like, you know how it is. Like those first few days
said,
are not.
You have to take him.
It's what he said. Yeah. So we felt like, okay, that's what he said. And I will never forget, you know, my daughter was like maybe she was 5 years old. And we probably should not have brought her. You know, like thinking about it, she didn't come to the service. She just came to the last like 5 minutes, but like they're still seeing an open casket, you know? Yeah. Those are the kinds of things that, you know, in the chaos of somebody dying, you make choices, right? And you're not sure if these are the choices. And then these are the things that linger in your mind as time goes on. Like, you know, you mentioned like the flashes of seeing your mom in the hospital bed, I believe. And like I always thought that movie, the TV show Big Little Lies actually does a very good job of sort of showing the flashes of like the trauma and the grief of somebody who, in this case, it's like abuse, you know, that's what their plot line is. A lot of movies do this, right? Like the character has the pictures in their mind, but man, it's quite a slideshow, you know?
I think most people are like me in that they sort of have these flickering memories. For me, it really came as because I spent a lot of time in the hospital with her, especially in her final year. And it almost felt like Polaroids or photographs that were coming more than movement. And I was, after she died, I was very kind of obsessed with the possibility of my own death. Like I'd walk through New York and think like a fire escape ladder was going to fall and kill me, or I was going to tumble headfirst down a subway station. And it's like, it is outlandish, but I think there's just, I mean, it's almost a different conversation, but there's such a surreality to it because death is so often, and this is like a Susan Sontag argument at this point, but it's basically so often just seen through photos or seen through film, and is so that when you experience it in real life, it feels as though you're seeing it in a photo because that's all you've ever known. And the actual reality of it, I think, takes a significantly longer time to really feel and to really process because it's totally new to you to see it through your own eyes and not see it as mediated through a screen.
You know, eternal sunshine of the spotless mind idea that there is a way to do this. And there's this scientist that you had to track down, that you actually like flew over there. They wouldn't let you in his lab. And then finally he reached out but it didn't sound to me like this was going to happen for us.
No,
right
I mean,
away.
So just for the not having read the book listener, the book is essentially a journey that kicks off from my interest in prolonged grief disorder and saying, this is weird. This seems like kind of wrong, but it's very intriguing that there will now be ways to potentially cure this form of grief. And I really tried to go through these things both as to explore these varieties of like AI grieving and what you're referring to, which is optogenetics, of deleting memories. I tried to do it mostly as a journalist. I was interested for myself to some degree, but I was more interested in if this is the future, like we should be looking into this stuff. And not a lot of people are. And so in the case of this, what he's working on is not specific to deleting grief memories, but he said that it could theoretically be used for that. Basically, optogenetics. So it's pretty complicated, but the TLDR is that you're controlling a neuron by introducing a photosensitive protein into them. So then you can modify the neuron through an external light being turned on or off. So you can theoretically turn it off from your laptop nearby. There are some pretty wild studies that were done in like 2013, I think was one of the first big ones, that was at MIT, where researchers implanted fearful memories into the brains of mice. And then a year later at, I think it was UCSD, University of California, San Diego, they did basically the opposite. So they erased and then restored memories in mice. And the way they showed this was by teaching the mouse how to do a maze. And they would often like give them pain, a shock in a part of the maze, until they stopped going there. And then they turned off the neuron through optogenetics that was remembering that place. And the mouse would go back as if it had never known that there was pain to be found in that part of the maze. And this guy who's called Carl Deisroth is at Stanford. And he's really one of the leaders in optogenetics. And so, I reached out to him. It was not easy getting a hold of him. He wrote a fantastic book that came out a few years ago. But I really was just curious, like if someone was really motivated, could they optogenetic their eternal sunshine of the spotless mind dreams, basically? He was saying like, he didn't want to speculate on a timeline, because you'd have to disconnect every memory, every cell from being a part of the fear memory or the grief memory, where you just weaken it to the point of disappearance, which for a human with a hyper complex brain, very hard to do. I did, however, talk to one philosopher of neuroscience who claimed that he thought that this could be done in 10 to 15 years. He's working out of Poland and was saying that he's like, I wouldn't advise it. This is a very American fast food solution to grief. And I was like, you're right, brother. You got us there. Anyone who's really paying attention is in on it, is I think definitely trying to dissuade people from doing it. Because ultimately, you don't remember that your dad died? Is that really what you want? You don't remember the pain around it? That's not something that is going to help you within the larger kind of infrastructure we've discussed about grieving over time. And if you think that grief has a hard end date, then yeah, sure, delete it, get it done, forget about it. But that's not really how grieving well works.
Well, what about if you could get rid of that time in the hospital, or part of that time in the hospital?
I think in some of the people who I talked to, there are other neuroscientists who said, yeah, there's maybe especially hellish things, people who've undergone really bad sexual trauma or some kind of other psychological trauma, who it might be valuable to get rid of those things. So yeah, there's a place for it. I don't personally feel I have the bona fides to say it's a great idea, but it's out there.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about AI.
Sure.
And the role in which, the role that AI is. You recently published a op-ed about AI as well, talking about, the quote unquote magic of it. There's no question that therapy is going to be done by AI and it's going to be effective. Coaching, like that level of therapy, or
are you saying AI on its own or complementing a human therapist?
I don't know.
Because I can see the second. I think full AI feels a little like the friend necklace being advertised in the subway. But
what is that necklace? I want to know what it is. Every time I see it, I'm like, it just says friend. What does it say exactly? It's a picture of like a pendant, like one of those like you've fallen and you can't get up kind of pendants.
Exactly. I think you wear it and it just records everything. And then I would guess, based on how I know the competitors work, that then at the end of your day, it can like analyze how your interactions were with other people. But this one sounds like it also is trying to establish an intimate relationship with you too.
Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah, it's not great. Not really the feel. We're like, hey, yeah, we're not going to have to work in Amazon warehouses anymore and can spend time on our art. It's like, no, just kidding. You're getting a necklace that talks to you.
Yeah, that's it. I guess I think that there's a possibility that the way that the AI would talk to you would be as good as the way that a therapist would talk to you. And it's more about your ability to disclose and what you feel you could say to it. And if you're just going to be like, oh, I can't deal with this, I need to go make a sandwich, like.
Do you not think there's some value in therapy of the empathy and the human understanding that you're getting? Do you think of it as purely a transactional to what the patient is willing to reflect and disclose? I'm asking genuinely.
I think that there's a care with which, like the words on the AI responses and the way that it's going to be giving you tips and tricks are going to be done with a style of language that I would find empathetic, that I would find careful and well composed.
And you wouldn't care knowing that it would, like, would you have to be duped? Would you have to think that it was coming from a human, or would you be fine?
I do think loneliness is obviously a massive problem, particularly around people who are grieving, people who are old, et cetera. And that could really, really help.
Yeah, it scares me a little bit because it's like, why are we doing that? Like, why are we not creating groups or retirement homes that like people can come together more? Why aren't we trying to like culturally push young people to take up volunteer shifts of calling, doing like, I've done this before where you like basically like phone bank retirement home and just chat with people for a while. It's like, that is mutually beneficial. Yeah, you can find an AI for it and it can be super VC backed and like great, it's easier. But I think that then that like drives us more into the sort of individualized culture that I would be trying to avoid long term.
I agree. But if you also look at the fact that what you want to have happen is still quite far away from happening, maybe
you're saying this is like a stopgap.
There's a bit of a bridge. I mean, I think then people are just like in their houses and on their computers more than ever. But
not great.
It's not great. But specifically talking for people who are older, who are sort of isolated anyway, who maybe have a disability that keeps them at home, I don't think it's the worst thing to think about, quote unquote, friend that could maybe come out of your clock radio and talk to you and be like, how are you doing today?
Wait, it's physically coming out like a bird out of
hand. Yeah, exactly. Okay. No, just like wakes you up without, this is going to happen without like beep, beep, beep. It's going to be like, hey, how are you, Cody?
And I don't doubt that this is, we're talking to 8-year-old Cody now. Yeah, I don't doubt that this will happen. I mean, a clock radio, anti-loneliness, is that enough for old people? Is that like actually, I don't know. Does that make you feel not alone?
No, but it's better than nothing, for somebody who doesn't have a lot of family or is living in a care home and is like sort of living off of like the aide talking to them for 2 seconds.
You roll up a bunch of retirement homes and then you fire a lot of the nurses there and you hire quote unquote technologies to do it. Like, of course, it's going to fit into our current kind of global financial model, whether that's good and like helpful and actually ameliorates loneliness. I think less so, but I don't doubt at all that like it's likely to happen if we get the technology that plays.
Can robots alleviate loneliness? Is it okay that they have robots in the common room of like every nursing home now, just like checking in on everybody? It's the cure for your parents you don't want to visit.
And the answer the answer to the grief cure too is there is no cure. It is a community instead. So it's not robots. I
did notice that. Yeah. I mean, I did notice in your book, but I'm just proffering robots. That might actually be the answer.
The graduate plastics. No, it's robots.
Exactly. I think the thing is that there's, you are a voice for what is the culture is rushing in a different direction, right? It's rushing in an ever more atomized direction. And what people in sort of like the elite intellectual class have grabbed onto is like psychedelics, right? Mm-hmm. And I do think as we get more into the AI, evolution, there will be more psychedelics, masseuses, like art, like all of these things will become more elevated and important to people's lives because they're going to want to feel real. They still need to feel like a human.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, like in the book, I research bibliotherapy, basically like grief therapy through reading curated books and just something as simple as looking at really meaningful art. And then psychedelics as well, I think is a hugely promising pathway. All those things I find superior to AI, to be honest. But yeah, no, I agree that there will definitely be a move, a realization that like the tactility of and the sort of humanness of things like art and books are just increasingly important.
So what about for you? What's the state of affairs now in your grief journey? Yeah.
Grief-wise? Well, it's been over 11 years since my mom died, which is both a very long time and no time at all. I mean, I think about her all the time. My family, we all call each other on her anniversary. I have friends that reach out. I try to do a digital detox on her death day as sort of a meditative thing. Yeah, I mean, I think just coming to terms with the fact that like you don't get full closure, you don't get full acceptance. It's something that at this point, if I want to talk about, I just have to let people know, hey, I want to talk about this. Has been liberating in a way, but yeah, I mean, it's still hard. I mean, I'm sure you know this with your dad. Is your mom still alive?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
she is. Yeah, mm-hmm. Is she old?
She is old and unwell. Yes,
she's unwell too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
How are you grappling with her sort of?
I don't like
with
it.
having death in the background. Yeah,
I don't like it. Yeah, I don't like it at all. I mean, it's it's very orphaning. I mean, losing sort of both of your parents is quite a wallop.
Yeah.
Do you feel that time heals all wounds in any way, or?
Yeah, I mean, you make meaning out of it over time. You get to go into the memories that were too hard to go into before, and you get to enjoy those in a way that before they were full of pain. It sucks in major life moments to be like, what would my mom say? Where would she be? But you reconcile yourself to that's life. Death is a part of it. We've been doing it forever. And the beauty of getting to feel anything at all, getting to feel devastated, getting to feel grief, that's pretty awesome in a lot of ways. That is life right there. And to try to get rid of that, to delete that as a memory, to try to paper over it with drugs or with alcohol or whatever is betraying, it sounds cheesy, but like the possibilities of being alive and all the feelings that come with it. So, to the degree that I can, I embrace it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Cody, for coming to talk to us on So Your Parents Are Old. And we will have a link to your book in the show notes so everybody can pick that up and check it out. It's wonderful. You were an absolutely beautiful writer. It's heavy material that you make. Like, it really just reads like it just goes down so easy. And it's wonderful to talk to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Vanessa. I really appreciate it.